South Carolina 5-2, 3-2 in the SEC with a week off to prepare for the stretch drive in the SEC Eastern Division. Georgia appears to be the team, but South Carolina can certainly match up against the Bulldogs. They have their one shot against Georgia, and who knows in 60 minutes of football. We saw it just last week on a Friday night at Syracuse. Will, I'm not going to peg it on you because I was having the same thoughts. Most of College Football Nation, Alabama, Clemson. But I don't want to overreact to Clemson losing to a pretty bad football team because we saw it last year against Pitt. Pitt was better than Syracuse. But every team that's won the national championship during this small period of time in which we've moved into the college football playoff has had that kind of curious loss to a decent team, an okay team. So for Clemson, maybe they still march on to the college football playoff with a loss to Syracuse on their resume because they did it with a loss to Pitt, a team that went 8-5. Ohio State did it in the first year of the playoff after losing to a 7-6 Virginia Tech team. So it's been done. Ole Miss was pretty good when they beat Alabama, but not elite. So everybody has their stumbles. Do we make too much out of the Clemson loss, or do you think this is a bump in the road, or is there concern that's valid?
Well, you can do both, and it depends on which fan, how you want to pull for or against Clemson. Number one, if you want to pull for Clemson and you want to say, well, it doesn't matter. Yeah, because it's so tough in college football to go undefeated. I think people just think, well, you've got this elite team, you should just run through the schedule, whether they're ranked or unranked opponents, and it's very, very difficult. The teams that go undefeated, that's kind of crazy to think about how they go about doing that. And Clemson, look, they went up and they didn't play their best game. Kelly Bryant was injured going in. I'm not a believer that because he had an injured ankle, Dabo Swinney shouldn't have played him. Certainly he did look gimpy, but he got a concussion because of a violent hit, a legal hit, a perfectly legal hit. There was nothing wrong with it, but a violent football play. I think he would have gotten that concussion. Maybe he runs away from him, but the bottom line is Kelly Bryant was okay enough to play the football game. And so you got to go to the backup quarterback. Now, if you want to be the other side of it, you can say, well, Clemson's defense all of a sudden looked very pedestrian. They gave up some plays in that game to Syracuse that we haven't seen the Clemson defense give up in a while. And quite frankly, you still don't expect them to give up. The offense really struggled moving the football, whether it was with Kelly Bryant or with Zed Cooper. So, all of a sudden, depending on which side of the cards you want to play, you can say, well, it doesn't matter. It's one game. They still got Georgia Tech. They still got NC State. They'll have a Florida State game. They've got games that will put them back in, plus an ACC championship game that will put them back in the top four, and it's going to be irrelevant. You can play the other card of that and say, man, all of a sudden there's some flaws with this football team. It's not the team that we've seen in years past. Deshaun Watson's not there to save them. And when they go against Georgia Tech or an NC State, North Carolina State in Raleigh, Georgia Tech in Death Valley next Saturday, all of a sudden that Clemson team looks a lot more vulnerable than maybe we thought 2 or 3 weeks ago.
Well, I'm not going to tout Syracuse as a serious contender, but technically they still have a shot in the ACC. They've only lost one game in the conference. What I will say is maybe they're more of the Purdue that we talked about a few weeks ago when Purdue showed itself to be better than they've been in the past. Syracuse has been one of the worst football programs, aside from a couple bowl seasons about 3 to 4 years ago, one of the worst teams in college football over the last 15 years. They've got a rich and storied tradition, but they've been awful. I heard a stat the other day that they have not been ranked since 2001. I don't mean ranked at the end of the season since 2001, in any week in college football. Did a little homework, just jogging my brain, basically, and there's nobody else that you can say that about in Power 5 football. They are the only team in 16 years that hasn't been ranked. But in addition to the Clemson upset, which is obviously the jewel on the resume right now, they go to LSU. They only lose by 1 score there. They could have won the game at LSU. That wasn't saying much maybe at the time, but LSU's they've got LSU talent. They played North Carolina State within a score. Maybe Syracuse and Dino Babers have something going in upstate New York. Again, I'm not touting contention here in the ACC, but maybe they're a postseason team this year finally.